Hello, you're listening to Queer Everything, a queer of color podcast about thriving in the world while being at odds with it. I'm Lena Rafiq Sheikh. My usual posting schedule fell off during a busy couple of weeks, and Friday, May 26th was what would have been my brother's 50th birthday. I needed a bit of a break. That week, something else also happened that makes today's episode all the more salient. A group of Muslim scholars and imams based largely in the US and Canada, nearly all men, signed an open letter clarifying their position on LGBTQ people. It was, to say the least, disappointing, both in terms of the way it collapsed into tired, same-old kinds of bigotry in the guise of compassion, and, most of all, in terms of how these people withstanding aligned themselves with the bullshit far-right shitstorm that we're in the midst of right now. Disappointing, but not surprising. Anyway, the Queer Muslim Solidarity Network is an excellent resource to follow. They're on Instagram as QM Solidarity Net. Links are in the show notes. My guest today is Mohammad Mertaban, a proud, very publicly out queer Muslim man. He's a physician, a father, and a devoutly religious person who always knew he was gay, but followed the path laid out by his community's interpretation of his religion. He was married to a woman for 8 years and only came out in his mid-30s. And because of his standing in the community and how he struggled, he made the decision to come out publicly. You can find him on Instagram at Mo the Gay Arab. My inclination lately has been towards shorter, one-off episodes. But for this, I'm posting the interview in full, in 2 segments. I re-listened to Mo's story the other night and was deeply moved by it all over again, and by his generosity with sharing it. When I think about why I'm doing this, I think of my younger self, the young people in my life, and all of the young queer people who are coming up in an age where once again we are under attack. You matter. Others like you exist. And there is a wide, affirming, and beautiful community that you are a part of, no matter what you've been given to believe. Welcome. Hi, everybody. I'm really excited to welcome Dr. Mohammad Mertaban today. Mohammad was introduced to me by another Mohammad of our mutual acquaintance when I mentioned last year what the through line for this season of Queer Everything would be, which was family. Mohammad, would you introduce yourself to us briefly?
Sure. Thank you for having me, Lena. I'm very excited to be here. And this is the first podcast that I've been interviewed to talk about my life story, and it is a pleasure. I am 42. I live in the Bay Area. I have 2 children. My oldest is 15 and my youngest is 12. I work as a pediatric hospitalist at a community hospital affiliated with Stanford. And I grew up in LA, and my family is Lebanese, and grew up fairly strict, kind of a Muslim family. My mom wears hijab. All my sisters wear hijab. Both my brother and I were leaders in our community growing up, very active in the Muslim community. And now I'm here.
Beautiful. Well, I appreciate you coming on and being willing to tell your story.
Mm-hmm.
We had a conversation a couple of weeks ago, and I was actually really struck both by, well, I mean, even before this conversation, when our mutual acquaintance introduced us, he linked me your Instagram page, where I thought it was really beautiful how you are really publicly out as an Arab man, which is not a common thing to see, and also how much joy there was in your account about being a parent and being a father, and how all of this, I mean, we are of a certain age, right? And I think that certain things tend to click into place when that happens. And it was just really nice to see all of that integrated so beautifully and then also so publicly out there.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think sometimes about why it's hard to pinpoint it. I feel like exactly why I feel so, well, one, I want to say that I feel incredibly privileged to be able to have that right and to be able to exercise that, because I know a lot of people, a lot of Muslims and a lot of Arabs who grow up in the States, and more so actually internationally, don't have that privilege. So I recognize my privilege and my ability to have a strong voice And I think about my life story, and when, I got married to a woman who is a wonderful human being, knowing that I was gay, and we were married for about 8 to 9 years, and then I got a divorce and then came out at a much later age than a lot of queer people would typically come out. I guess, like, and when I say typical, if you think, there's no real typical age, but like, a lot of my friends are like, oh, I came out in my 20s, and I came out in my mid 30s. So like almost 10 years later. So, and I think with that comes a little bit more of an understanding of like an identity strength, and feeling like I personally feel like I tried a lot to be straight. Like I got married, I had children, and I was told by my community that doing that would kind of, when I was a younger, like active youth who was expected to be kind of like married right after college, because that's what everyone in our community did. All my friends were engaged before they graduated college, and they were married by the time they had graduated. And so, and me being the oldest son of my family, I had, expectations laid out that I felt like were kind of like weighing heavily down on me. And so I sought out to do the same, in a sense, to feel a sense of belonging. And also because, frankly, as a youth, when you're being told that marriage is half of your faith, and that your faith is not complete until you're married, you start to really like seek to be complete. And for me, marriage was what I thought was going to complete me. And so anyways, I got married. Everyone's like, how did you get married? Knowing that you were gay. And it's true. How did I do that? Like, honestly. But I think, that being said, I can go into like the details of that later. I think that experience gave me the strength to say at one point, like, I can't do this anymore, and I don't want to suffer. And because of that, I felt so compelled to be able to, knowing that I had a voice in the Muslim community, and knowing that I had the privilege of being able to grow up in kind of a liberal state, to be able to say that I am not, married anymore, and I'm not straight, and I'm gay, and I'm proud of it. And so my mission at that point, after, a couple years of me kind of like settling into my identity, going through my divorce, establishing some sense of equilibrium around my identity, then saying like, I don't care what anyone else says about how I want to live my life. This is how I'm going to live my life authentically. And if you're here for it, I welcome you with open arms and an open heart and so much love. And if you're not, then me and you are not compatible.
Yeah. So it sounds like it was a long journey to get to that degree of comfort.
Yeah, very, very long. Yeah.
I'm always interested in stories of how people understand themselves, find themselves to be at odds with what they thought they knew about themselves or who they're supposed to be, and then how they navigate that. And so I'm curious, you said you grew up in the States mostly, right? In Los Angeles?
I grew up in LA. Born in Lebanon, grew up in LA, and then moved back to Lebanon when during some of my formative years, when I was around 12 to about 16. So I spent middle school and then parts of high school in Lebanon. And then came back to the States, completed high school here, and went to college here. And I think when I think about my childhood, I had a pretty traditional upbringing. My parents spoke Arabic in the household. I remember growing up with my dad making us put up signs that said Arabic only so that we didn't speak English. And then thankfully had the privilege of going to Lebanon, and I got to know my relatives on my dad's side, because my mom's side were already in the States. I got to know a lot of my cousins. And then one big advantage was just connecting with my Lebanese culture and religion. My family, we kind of were, before going to Lebanon, we were a little bit more like cultural and less religious. And when we went to Lebanon, I got to know my cousins who were fairly religious. They prayed 5 times a day, fasted Ramadan, prayed their Sunnah prayers, like the extra prayers, and they went to the mosque. And so I would just accompany them because they were so nice to me, and they were excited to welcome their American cousins. So I went along and got along with them, and eventually became, started praying at the age of 13 and fasted my first full Ramadan at that age. Started going to the mosque. My dad enrolled us in a private Islamic school in Lebanon. And so like reared through a very traditional rigorous Islamic curriculum, learning about Deen and Quran and how to read the Quran and how to recite it and interpretations of the Quran. And I got like a baseline understanding of religion. And that became part of me. And when, ironically, at that time is when I started realizing that I was different than other kids. So
at what age did you realize that you
13.
13?
I think I knew I was a little different when I was 11 because I had crushes on all the boys in 5th grade. But I didn't know what to make of it and was confused. And when I was 13 years old in Lebanon, I like the identity of I wouldn't even call it an identity, but the realization that I was attracted to boys was a lot more apparent because of the fact that the Islamic school that we went to was segregated by gender. So the boys were in one class and the girls were in another class. And so all the people at my school were all boys and they were all Lebanese boys, and so,
I lived in a dorm in high school. It's like heaven and hell all at once.
And so they were all really hot. And so I was like, it became very apparent to me that I was attracted to boys. But I think the flip side of that is I knew inherently that that was a wrong feeling and that I needed to somehow reject it, expel it. And so religion became, for me as a 13-year-old, a form of self-purification, like a reason for me to exist and a reason for me to have purpose. And so I became religious and I started praying, reading the Quran, reciting. I hung out at the mosque. Some of my closest mentors were shuyukh that I hung out with a lot. And I learned the foundation of like Islam in Lebanon.
Wow. And did you suspect that anyone else around you might have also been gay or queer?
No.
No, huh?
I think at that age, no. I think I thought I was the only one. Like I don't know. I think also it was such an isolating feeling that I wondered if others were like me, but never even had the audacity to explore that because I was so shameful of that part of me that I felt like there was no way I was going to let any part of that out. In fact, I did everything possible to kind of like suppress that. And that was the theme throughout my 20s and my teens and my 20s is to suppress every part of my sexuality and create a space where I couldn't express my sexuality. And so it made it harder and harder and harder and harder. And in my mind, I was like, if I do that, then I won't come out and no one will find out.
So you went back to the States.
Yeah. So I moved back from Lebanon. I moved back to the States when I was 16. I was in 10th grade and then had to relearn English because I'd forgotten my English and made new friends. And then at that point, in high school, a lot of my friends, like my American friends, once they got to know me better and realized I wasn't dating any girls, my excuse was religion. It was really easy to hide behind religion. I was like, I'm Muslim.
We don't do that.
We don't do that. We don't date. We just get married. And
young,
we get married young. And so I didn't date. And it became even more apparent to me that I was just gay and I had zero attraction towards women. I thought in my mind that maybe that could develop at some point. So I always held on to the hope that part of me would change and that this was like a temporal type of feeling. Me being attracted to guys was temporal. And this was back in like the 90s. So, like graduated high school in 1999. So no one was like, companies didn't have like sponsorships in their like pride parades and no one was talking about coming out and we didn't have access to social media back then. So I didn't have a way of truly connecting with people unless I like went to areas where people would congregate which I was like way too nervous to do. No one in my high school was out. So I didn't really know what to do with these feelings except to just sit with them and hope that something would change.
So what started you on the path that eventually saw you get married to a woman?
So after I graduated high school, and actually during high school a little bit, if I can rewind, is that I continued down the path of just being involved in the Muslim community.
Right.
In high school, I joined the local youth group at our mosque and then would go to Muslim conferences and became an organizer of some of these Muslim conferences and organized like high school MSAs, Muslim Student Associations. And then from there, I went to college at UCLA, and UCLA was known for their MSA. They had a very large, very active, very political MSA that was known nationally. And it was the first thing I did when I set foot on campus was I went to the MSA. I didn't even tour the campus. I asked exactly where the MSA was, and I wanted to go and meet some Muslims there. And that was, again, in an effort, knowing that I had just moved out of my parents' house. If I have the freedom to do whatever I want, and that feeling was like scary and overwhelming because despite me being so excited to have my individuality, I was also afraid that I was going to fall into sin. And I needed to find a way to control everything that I was doing and to create a community that kept me accountable. And so the MSA was my first introduction to UCLA. I got to know some of the brothers and sisters there, and they became my community for the next 5 years. And I was very involved in the MSA. I was like commonly volunteering on like 5 or 6 different committees. I went to a meeting every single day after classes. We go to like multiple events, started organizing. I started becoming involved with the local Muslim news magazine that we published nationally, and then eventually became the MSA president my 4th year at UCLA. And after that was the MSA West president. So coalition of like MSAs on the entire West Coast. We also organized national conferences, regional conferences, and then became a delegate to MSA National.
Wow.
All of that to say is that I was a community-oriented individual. I loved the idea of community service from the get-go. And from there, I think religion just like drove every portion of my life. And again, like I mentioned earlier, being part of a religious community, the expectation is that at one point you're going to get married.
Right.
And so when my senior year of college, my last year, I stayed at UCLA for 5 years. I started realizing that, I was already getting questions like, who was I going to marry? Who did I have my eyes on? My parents were, my mom started introducing me, at least like telling me about girls. My sister started doing the same. And so I was like, I need to figure out what the heck I'm going to do. And so
That must have been terrifying, though.
Yeah, as a 22-year-old, not knowing, thinking about like, normal 22-year-olds are thinking about what kind of job they're going to get, and where they're going to, what their life is going to look like after they finish college. And for me, I was trying to figure out like this like very complex identity question that I had. And so, and again, I also felt so incredibly alone. Like there was not a single person I could talk to about this. Like I did not mention this to a single person for so long. And I remember my senior year when, frankly, a lot of people were asking me who I was going to get married, and people even like thought of like specific like girls that, I could marry. And I realized I need to talk to someone about this. So I mustered up the energy to come out to one of my friends in college, a Muslim guy that was raised in the States, an American Muslim. And his response to me was, that must be really hard. He was very kind and compassionate. That must be really hard. I can't imagine what you're going through, but I think this is temporary and you need to get married to a woman. And again, timeline-wise, this is in 2004. So at that point, I thought about it and I was like, he's right. I need to get married. But also was not sure how that was going to happen because at this point I had zero attraction towards women, but still was hopeful that it would still develop, thinking that I haven't had any sexual experiences or any like romantic or intimate experiences, period. And so at that point I was like, okay, it's something that can develop. This is normal. This is natural, you know, but was also scared out of my mind. I came out to two other friends separately and they both told me the same thing. And then after that, I realized I was still very, very scared. So I needed to kind of like talk to people who I felt had a little more knowledge and experience and maybe had addressed this before with other people in the community on, you know, on a private level. And so I went to 3 different shuyukh that I trusted, that I was very close to, that they knew me as a youth. They knew my family, they knew my siblings, and all 3 of them unilaterally told me to get married to a woman. And the excuse they used was like, marriage is half of your faith. And in order for your faith to be complete, you need to be married. And being married to a woman is the only thing that's right. And it's what's going to complete you as a Muslim. And so again, I'm just like left, either do I stay single as an incomplete person feeling like a failure in life, or do I endure this and just get married? And one thing that I knew about me that I was very, you know, I knew about me when I was earlier is I love children, and I figured this was the only path in my mind, in my like very heteronormative and internalized homophobic mind, thought that the only way to have a family was with a man and a woman. And I even remember a very sentinel moment in my life where, you know, after I came out to all of those 6 people, I came out to an additional person who wasn't Muslim. He was one of my friends that me and him were like politically involved on campus and campus elections and doing some organizing work with students of color. And I came out to him because he had just come out like a couple months prior to me telling him. And he told me that, you know, you can still have a family with a man and you can still have children in a same gendered relationship. And so my response to him was like, I still don't recognize, I think at that point, sexuality to me was purely sex. It wasn't a romantic version of relationships. It wasn't anything romantic or anything. It wasn't a commitment. So for me, I think I actually said, I still only recognize that a relationship and a marriage has to be between a man and a woman. And I kept telling myself, if I say these things, then at some point I will convince myself that that would be the case. So I kept saying them. And ironically, he told me, he's like, well, you're going to be one of those guys that gets married and 10 years later comes out and gets a divorce. So,
Mo, are you still in touch with this guy?
So, you know what's funny is when I moved to San Francisco in 2017, I ran into him in the city, and now we're really good friends.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, really, really good friends. We go to music festivals together. We grab dinner and coffee and stuff like that together. And he is an incredibly wonderful, wonderful human. And he doesn't know how, he definitely knows now, but for a long time, he didn't really know how much he affected me and how sentinel that conversation that we had together was.
Yeah.
But he was right, you know, so I ended up getting married thinking that that's what I needed to do. And it was the scariest thing I had ever done in my entire life. And I got to know my ex-wife, and she was like the most beautiful person I had ever met in terms of everything. Personality, she was bubbly and effervescent and kind and hilarious and funny, and she spoke Arabic and was religious, and we came from similar communities, and she knew my family, and my family knew her. My family loved her. She was gorgeous. I don't know, I just got along.
So, excellent match on paper.
Yeah, minus the gay thing. Minus a big part, which was me being gay. But I mean, honestly, I look back at it and I can laugh about these things now, and I'm so incredibly thankful. And I never want to take my ability to even just exist and publicly talk about this for granted. But going through it was really rough. And the one thing that I would say I had at this point is one of my friends I could talk to about this since I came out. The other 2 friends I kind of like intermittently, but they were like when I came out to them, they just seemed so uncomfortable that I was like,
Mm.
okay, I'm never bringing this up again. But the other friend was very much willing to kind of like go on this journey with me. So he was supportive, and I called him every single time I had like quote unquote bad thoughts, about like, I was gay, so like I was attracted to men. So every time
Mm.
if I saw like a hot guy or whatever, like I would call him and we'd talk through it, and he would basically
Mm.
talk me off a ledge.
Mm.
And yeah, got married.
Mm. That must have been a hard day.
The wedding, you know, the wedding was definitely hard. I don't know, like you asked that question and I think about it, I'm like, I think about my wedding and I had good memories from my wedding, like very
Mm.
good memories. I think that I I mean this is also like maybe I have some sense of toxic positivity inside of me too, where I always like try to spin things to work for me, because I identify as like someone who's pretty resilient and I want try to make things work in general. And so my wedding to me, like my wedding was a lot of fun. Like I got dance with
Mm.
some of my friends and meet. I love people. I'm like a 99% like Myers-Briggs, like extrovert. As I grow older, I'm becoming a little bit more introverted, but like
Mm.
definitely a lot extrovert. I love talking to people. My energy comes from people. And so my wedding day was just like, I just saw smiling people and they were so
Mm.
happy. They were all here to celebrate us.
Mm.
And so it was a good memory. And I think I'm thankful that I do have that memory. And I think I also really good at suppressing my true feelings. And I did that for a long time. So to some extent, I did suppress a lot of my real emotions and fears during my
Mm.
wedding in an effort to just enjoy the moment.
Yeah. It sounds like your ex-wife is a wonderful person and the two of you got along really well.
Yeah, we were married for about 8 years,
Mm.
9 years, 2005 until 2014, I think. Yeah, nine
Mm-hmm.
years. And I worked after I graduated in Orange County for a while in SoCal, and then decided to pursue medicine. And so I got into medical school at the University of Vermont. So I went there as a family. At this point, we were married and we had two children,
Mm.
and we moved to Vermont. And I think Vermont, I owe so much of my happiness to Vermont.
Mm.
This is another sentinel moment in my life where I, for the first time, almost felt like even though I was married and I had a lot of freedoms and I had the ability to make decisions on my own and things like
Mm-hmm.
that, Vermont was one of the first times where it almost felt like I was moving out to college again. Like I
Mm.
moved away from the Muslim community. I moved away from my family. I moved away from all of the things that kept me quote unquote grounded, and which
Mm.
mean in my mind really meant closeted.
Mm-hmm.
And when I moved to Vermont, it was just me and her and the kids
Mm.
and all of my new friends that I met in medical school.
Mm-hmm.
They had a little small mosque in Vermont that was cute, and I went there for like Friday prayers and things like that,
Mm.
and Ramadan and Taraweeh. But it wasn't people that there was not that many young people, and there was a lot of like new immigrants, and
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really share a lot of commonalities with them,
Mm.
and felt like a lot of the version of Islam that they practice was very just kind of like literalist by the book,
Mm-hmm.
and practicing a version of religion that they grew up with
Mm-hmm.
their respective countries. So, which was very different than the way I practiced. So we kind of didn't really go to the mosque that much. We developed a small group of like really close friends that were so incredibly loving in Vermont and kind, and they loved the kids, and we hung out together. But I think in Vermont is like where I truly started feeling like something is wrong with me.
Mm-hmm.
And after my first year of medical school, I came back to visit for the summer, came back to LA. And I remember there was this one brother that was really close. We were really close prior to me moving to Vermont, and we kept in touch intermittently. I came back to the community, and everyone told me that he had just kind of disappeared and didn't
Mm.
know, they had tried to get in touch with him, and they tried to Some of my friends were trying to call him and meet up with him, but he like went AWOL. No one knew where he was. So I took a shot in the dark and figured I would also just like kind of try to find out what was going on. And so I texted him and we ended up grabbing coffee. He responded to me and he told me he wasn't Muslim anymore. And that's why he hadn't come around to the mosque or hung out with any of the brothers. And at this point, and I would say for, as you know, like anyone who in our community, when they leave Islam, it's kind of a big deal. Like it is a big deal. Under an Islamic government, those people get tortured, if not killed. And so thankfully we didn't live in an Islamic government. We lived in Orange County. So, so that person, him and I met up and I could only imagine what he was going through. And I tried to play the role of a supportive friend, because when you grow up with the idea that religion is what keeps you grounded and it's everything to not have that anymore is so incredibly stressful. And I say this fast forwarding to kind of like what happened to me later, having that same experience, because I think this is another kind of like turning point in my life where, when I asked him why he wasn't Muslim, this guy was like a guy that went to the masjid, to the mosque every day for like Fajr prayer, for morning prayer. He was there for all 5 prayers. He was also involved in the youth group. And when I realized he wasn't Muslim anymore, I was like, this is a big deal. And took a step back to think about my own religious pathway. And he was, to me, his strength and his authenticity, although I think a lot of Muslims would not see it that way. But for me, it was strength, authenticity, and kind of this like fervent desire to follow the truth. What was his truth? And when I asked him why he wasn't Muslim anymore, he talked to me about many reasons. And for him, there were some issues with how he was treated in the mosque. He experienced a lot of racism. And I don't want to disclose his race just out of privacy for who he is, but he experienced a lot of racism in the different mosques in Southern California. And he talked about disagreements with certain parts and aspects of Islam, which I don't want to get into. But I think that the main thing that at least stuck with me was the fact that he told me that his mom was a lesbian. And he told me that his mom was the most beautiful. She raised him as a single mom. And she was the most beautiful person he'd ever met. And she was his role model. And he would, he hoped to be half of who she was. And so, and he couldn't even, like, the idea of his mom somehow being condemned to hell because she was gay, it couldn't even cross his mind. And that superseded his belief in this kind of system that delegitimized his mom's existence. And so, so that was, that next month was really rough for me because I spent basically a month not sleeping. I couldn't stop thinking about it. And it was at the end of summer, so I went back to Vermont and had to restart medical school again. And during that month, I started to think about my own pathway, religion, and really started to ask questions like, why am I like this? And at this point, kind of like bringing you up to speed, I've been married for almost like 8 years, and I still was not like sexually attracted to my wife. Didn't work. And I loved her to death. True love from the deepest parts of my heart, but had no attraction to her. Not, because of anything that she did, just primarily because of, the fact that I was gay. And I started to ask questions like, why? Like, why did God do this to me? Like, why me? What is it that I did in my life to deserve this? And carried, and then also had this overwhelming feeling of guilt and shame. Guilt for marrying my ex-wife in the first place. That always kind of was there. that was always there, but that resurfaced very intensely around that time. And then shame around why I was feeling these feelings. Like, why is it that I'm attracted to men, and why can I not control who I'm attracted to? And I thought, like, I tried so hard in my like internalized, very homophobic mind. That was me trying. I tried so hard to be straight. I would go to the mosque. Like, I remember Ramadans where I would spend the entire night at a mosque praying for God to make me straight. Literally 10 days in a row. And my only prayer was, please make me straight. Please make me straight. Please make me straight. I don't like being gay. I don't like being gay. I can't get rid of this. I need to get rid of this so that I can have a fruitful marriage. And then at that point during that month, I think I realized that a lot of those feelings were just coming to surface. You know, a lot of those, do I truly believe? I think the first and foremost question was, why am I like this? And then the other thing is, if I'm like this, then why does Islam not allow me to be who I want to be? And why was I always told you can't be gay, you can't be yourself? And at some point I realized that I think there has to be a way where this is okay, you know? And I took a step back, and my focus became my own spirituality. So I kind of put my sexuality aside and really started to address my spirituality, because for me, the roadblock towards, and I would say actually spirituality is the wrong word, but I think religion. The roadblock to me achieving self-acceptance was my religion in my head. And it wasn't just religion, it was the way I learned, the version of religion that I learned. And having had that experience with, you know, that conversation, that like sentinel conversation with my friend that told me he wasn't Muslim anymore, I then took on this new kind of like project or whatever, or feat, to figure out what is my religion, and is my religion Islam, and am I Muslim? And if I'm Muslim, is this the type of Islam that I want to continue practicing for the rest of my life? And all of these questions. And in the end, I realized that a lot of things about how I was taught religion, and to no fault of anyone, this is, you know, just kind of like what I learned from the mosques I went to, and from the books that I was told to read, and from the, you know, the organizations that I was involved in. And I learned a couple of things, like Islam truly is a religion that is based off of an oral tradition. And when passed down through an oral tradition, you know, there is, people make mistakes when they say things. People hear things one way and they come out a different way. And then those who hear them, they interpret them a different way, and then in turn say them a different way. So the idea that we have created this like scientific way of trying to understand religion is truly, for me, was like, and this is no disrespect to anyone that believes in this system, it just didn't work for me, to create like an objective version of religion, you know, where Islam was, this person said this, who heard from this person who said this, who heard from this person who said this, and it went back to the prophet like 300 generations later. So to me, that creates a space where people kind of formulate this funnel down version of what they want, which means that if you ever hear another opinion of someone else who heard maybe the same thing and they interpreted it differently, that wasn't a mainstream opinion, so we're going to cancel that person. Or the idea of like judging someone's life and saying that they, you know, what they say is not authentic versus like what someone else said was authentic. To me, that's extremely judgmental. And also, you're limiting your own knowledge by not knowing these other things. So anyways, all of that to say is that I think what I had come to realize is that the version of Islam that I had learned up to date was not the version that I want to continue learning or ascribing to. And at one point, I I don't think I was ever like, I ever left Islam. Like, and honestly, it's a little like vague in my mind, but I don't think I ever left Islam. But there was a point where I like didn't know what I believed in anymore. And that to me was even more stressful than my sexuality, frankly. At that point, it took first, it was like, I had, I think at that point I was like 33 and I'd spent 20 years knowing one way to live. And for me, Islam, at least what I was taught, it's not just like a religion where like, you just go to church on Sundays, it's like it's a way of life. And that's something that everyone talks about. Islam is a way of life. Religion partakes in every portion of your day. When you wake up in the morning, you remember God. When you go to school, you remember God. When you're exercising, you remember God. So it's part of like a daily ritual. And so I felt completely lost. I spent months just crying myself to sleep if I slept because I didn't know who I was anymore. And then I remember this one very specific day where I was talking to my ex-wife and I had told her about all of these struggles that I was having and I stopped praying my prayers. I think frankly at that point I couldn't bow down to a God that I was very angry at God in the most like and I know a lot of Muslims who may listen to this podcast would be upset at me for saying that. But I think the reality is that I was very angry at God. And I was very angry at the fact that I was created this way. And that I had to suffer and endure so much in order to just like be me, And when I told my ex-wife, she was devastated, because that's not the person that she married. And now she's dealing with my own, spiritual rediscovery / like destruction. But she said something very poignant to me that immediately almost like was like the light bulb turn on. And she asked me if I was like, I don't even know if I'm Muslim anymore. And her question to me was like, do you believe in God? And I said, yes. That was like, without a doubt, I 100% believe in God. And till this day, of course I do. And she's like, then you're Muslim because that's all that's required of you to believe in God. And that, Muhammad was his messenger. And I believed that. And so it made it very easy for me to, well, actually nothing was easy, but it gave me a little bit more direction in the sense that like, frankly, at that point, I was considering like atheism, being agnostic, just being nothing, and so this kind of gave me a little bit more direction. And
she gave you a way to find your way back.
Yeah. And I would say like, I don't think she gave me a way to find my way back, but she gave me a way to find my way towards a different identity that includes me being a Muslim, but in a a very drastic different version than the Islam I practiced for 20 years.
In the next episode, I speak with Mo about coming out to his now ex-wife, his children, his family, and his community, and also about leaning into his queerness. I've dropped a link to his Instagram in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.